You remember what it was like, don't you? 1947. The war was over, but victory tasted bitter. Your ration book was thicker than it had been during the Blitz. Bread, for God's sake, was rationed for the first time. Your wife was queuing for potatoes like they were gold. The winter before had frozen Britain solid, killed the crops, and left families huddling around coal fires they could barely afford to light. Everything was grey. Grey skies, grey buildings, grey faces worn down by years of sacrifice. The government kept promising things would get better, but you knew the truth: Britain was broke. Every factory, every workshop, every bit of industrial output was being pushed toward exports. Earn foreign currency, pay off the war debt, tighten your belt just a little longer. Then, from a small factory in Bradford of all places, came something that made you stop and stare, something that didn't look grey or defeated or apologetic. A car so beautiful, so thoroughly modern, that it seemed to have arrived from a future Britain desperately needed to believe in. The Jowett Javelin. You might not remember the name, most people don't, but for 6 extraordinary years, this compact saloon from a tiny manufacturer punched so far above its weight that it rewrote what people thought a 1.5-litre family car could do. It won its class at Monte Carlo, it dominated at Spa, and then, almost as quickly as it arrived, it vanished, taking the Jowett company with it. This is the story of engineering brilliance meeting financial reality, of a car designed during wartime that was simply too good, too ambitious, and ultimately too expensive for a small Yorkshire firm to sustain. But before we talk about how it all fell apart, we need to understand just how extraordinary this machine really was. Section 1. A wartime vision. Let's go back to 1942. Britain is deep in the Second World War. Most car factories have converted to building aircraft parts, ammunition, anything the war effort demands. But at Jowett Cars in Bradford, Managing Director Charles Riley is thinking about the future. He knows that when this war ends, the world will need new cars, and Jowett's pre-war offerings won't cut it. Riley places an advertisement for a chief designer. The man who answers it is 31-year-old Gerald Palmer, working at MG but eager for a bigger challenge. Palmer had grown up in southern Rhodesia, where his father was chief engineer for the state railways. He understood rough roads, extreme conditions, and the demands of export markets. Precisely what Britain would need in the post-war world. Palmer got the job, and Jowett gave him something remarkable: complete freedom. No product planning departments, no committees, just one instruction: design the car that Jowett needs for the future. Palmer seized the opportunity with both hands. By 1944, the first prototype was running. What Palmer had created was genuinely revolutionary for a British car. An aerodynamic pressed steel monocoque body when most manufacturers were still bolting separate panels onto chassis frames. Torsion bar suspension all round, with independent front suspension, using double wishbones when cart springs were still common. And most radical of all, a water-cooled flat-4 engine with overhead valves and an aluminium block. The engine deserves special attention. 1,486 cubic centimeters, producing 50 brake horsepower at 4,100 revolutions per minute. Twin Zenith carburetors fed it. The compression ratio was 7.2 to 1. Palmer had called in Harry Westlake, the legendary tuning specialist, to optimize the induction system. The radiator sat behind the engine, unusual, but it gave excellent accessibility for maintenance. That curved windscreen you're looking at? First on a British production car. Those headlights fared into the wings, years ahead of their time. The structure itself was immensely strong. Palmer had designed a substantial box-section chassis, then decided to weld the steel shell directly to it. The result was a car that was both rigid and remarkably light for its size. Section 2. Launch into austerity. The Javelin made its first public appearance on Saturday, July 27, 1946. King George VI started a cavalcade celebrating 60 years of the British motor industry from Regent's Park. The new Jowett, not yet in full production, was part of that procession through London's West End. but series production didn't actually begin until November 1947. And when it did, Britain was in the depths of post-war austerity. Food rationing had intensified. Bread, unrationed during the entire war, was now rationed. Potatoes were rationed. The government was pushing every penny of industrial output toward exports to earn desperately needed foreign currency. The Javelin cost £819 at launch. Let me put that in context for you. A Morris Minor cost around £430. An Austin, a 40, about £380. The Javelin was competing with cars like the Riley RM 1.5 litre at £863, the Jaguar 1.5 litre at £953, and the Lanchester LD10 at £927. This wasn't a people's car. This was an executive saloon from a company that had previously built basic twin-cylinder economy vehicles. The ambition was staggering, and people wanted them. The problem was, Jowett couldn't build them fast enough. Bodies were manufactured by Briggs Motor Bodies at their Doncaster factory. Early gearboxes came from Henry Meadows. The engine, that beautiful flat four, was all Jowett's own work, but coordinating all these suppliers proved challenging for a small manufacturer. The car itself was magnificent. 14 feet long, 5 feet wide, weighing about 1 ton. Inside, you could seat 6 people, 5 comfortably, 6 if they were friendly, as one owner put it. The column gear change left the floor uncluttered. Boot space was surprisingly generous, and that performance 77 miles per hour top speed from a 1.5 litre engine. Fuel economy around 30 miles per gallon, 0 to 50 miles per hour in 13.4 seconds. Section 3. Racing proves the breed. Now, here's where the story gets interesting, because someone at Jowett realized that motorsport success could sell cars, and the Javelin's advanced chassis and willing engine made it surprisingly competitive. Tommy Wise was an experienced driver and garage owner from Hornsey in Yorkshire. In October 1948, he bought a new Javelin specifically to enter the January 1949 Monte Carlo Rally. The car was essentially standard stiffer shock absorbers, a 17-gallon reserve fuel tank, duplicated fuel lines, and Michelin tires. That was it. The Monte Carlo Rally that year was the first since the war. 7 different starting points across Europe, all converging on Monaco, followed by special stages in the mountains. Wise started from Glasgow. The route took them through Boulogne, where a mayoral welcome caused unexpected delays, then on through Luxembourg. They had to maintain strict timing schedules while dealing with whatever weather and road conditions Europe threw at them. Wise later wrote about the experience. After getting delayed at Boulogne, they had to push the Javelin hard to make up time. They set a cruising speed of 70 miles per hour on those terrible post-war French roads. The little flat four took what Wise described as a terrific battering from the rough pavé. But it held together. More than that, it won its class. The Javelin finished 14th overall and first in the 1.5 litre category, beating Maurice Gatsonides in his Hillman Minx by 11.8 marks. Gerald Palmer, the car's designer, rode as co-driver. Can you imagine designing a car during the war and 4 years later, you're standing on the podium at Monte Carlo with it? Success bred more success. In July 1949, Jowett entered a single Javelin in the Spa 24 Hours endurance race in Belgium. The car ran in the 2-litre touring class. For 24 hours, that flat four engine ran without significant trouble. The Javelin won its class and achieved a race average of 65.5 miles per hour over 1,700 miles. At a time when reliability was everything, the Javelin had just proved itself on one of Europe's most demanding circuits. These weren't flukes. In 1952, a Javelin won its class at the International RAC Rally and took the Best Closed Car Award. In 1953, a privateer Javelin won the International Tulip Rally, outright not just its class, but the entire event. A 1.5 litre saloon from Bradford beating everything else entered. Section 4. The Fatal Decisions. Success should have secured Jowett's future. Instead, it exposed the company's fundamental weakness, They were too small to support the production levels they'd planned. Let's talk about what went wrong, because this is where it gets painful. In 1951, Jowett made what seemed like a reasonable decision. They'd been buying gearboxes from Henry Meadows, but they had some transmission manufacturing experience. Why not make their own gearboxes and save money? The project was a disaster. Even though Jowett knew transmissions, something went catastrophically wrong with the tooling or the process. Gearbox production fell behind almost immediately. Bodies kept arriving from Briggs Motor Bodies in Doncaster at the planned rate, but without gearboxes, they just stacked up in the assembly area. Complete body shells with no powertrains, gathering dust while Jowett burned through its working capital trying to fix the production problems. The reputation damage was immediate and severe. Warranty claims for gearbox failures started mounting. Customers who'd paid premium prices for these advanced cars found themselves stranded. Word spread that Jowett's were unreliable. The racing success meant nothing if the cars couldn't be trusted for daily use. Then came the crankshaft problems. Palmer's aluminium block flat 4 was advanced, but the material quality available in post-war Britain wasn't always up to standard. Early engines suffered from brittle crankshafts that could fail, especially under the stress of competition use. Jowett eventually solved this in 1952 with a redesigned, strengthened crankshaft. But again, the damage to the marque's reputation had been done. Meanwhile, Britain's export market, the lifeline Jowett was counting on, collapsed. Export sales fell by 75% in 1952. The British government had temporarily increased purchase tax, and domestic buyers were waiting for it to come back down. When it finally dropped in April 1953, the sudden surge in demand caught everyone off guard, but Jowett was in no position to capitalize on it. And then Ford bought Briggs Motor Bodies. Suddenly, Jowett's body supplier was owned by one of the world's largest manufacturers. Ford was reluctant to extend credit to a struggling small manufacturer or to continue producing bodies in the small quantities Jowett needed. Jowett started negotiations for alternative body suppliers, but nothing materialized in time. Production of the Javelin ceased in 1953. Just over 23,300 units had been built. The company tried to survive building the Jupiter sports car, which used Javelin mechanicals in a tubular chassis with aluminium bodywork. Jupiters actually remained in demand. They'd won their class at Le Mans in 1950, 51, and 52, but they couldn't generate enough profit to save the company. Section 5. The End of the Road. In July 1954, Jowett Cars Limited announced they would sell their main factory at Idle to International Harvester, the tractor manufacturer. The Times newspaper noted that Jowett had run into difficulties after BMC acquired body supplier Fisher & Ludlow, further restricting Jowett's options for sourcing bodies. The company reported a small profit that year, remarkably. At the 35th annual general meeting in August 1954, the chairman expressed profound regret over their circumstances. Some 65,000 vehicles had been built since 1946. Now it was over. The company didn't go bankrupt in the traditional sense. Shareholders were paid out pound for pound. All debts were settled. Jowett switched to manufacturing aircraft parts for Blackburn and General Aircraft Company in a former woolen mill, maintaining parts and service support for existing vehicles until December 1963. The factory site at Idle was acquired by International Harvester, who used it until 1983. When they demolished the buildings, most of the site became a Morrison's supermarket. There's a commemorative frieze in the store foyer and a nearby road called Javelin Way. That's all that remains of the factory where one of Britain's most advanced cars was built. Section 6. The Engineering Legacy. So what made the Javelin genuinely special? Why does it matter 7 decades later? Start with that chassis. Gerald Palmer designed proper rack and pinion steering when most British cars still used recirculating ball systems, torsion bars all round when others were using leaf springs, telescopic shock absorbers at a time when lever arm dampers were the norm. The ride quality and handling were exceptional for the era. The Motor magazine wrote in 1953 that the Javelin was, in many respects, one of the most attractive medium-sized cars built anywhere in the prices. World. The braking system evolved through production. Early PA and PB models used hydraulic brakes at the front with mechanical linkage at the rear. From late 1950, they were fully hydraulic. The car had a wheelbase of 102 inches and a track of 51 inches. Ground clearance was 8 inches. Palmer had designed this for rough colonial roads, and it showed. That flat-4 engine remains fascinating. The aluminium block with wet cylinder liners was genuinely advanced engineering. The rear-mounted radiator was unconventional but gave excellent serviceability. Yes, it could overheat, and yes, like all flat-4s, it was prone to oil leaks. But when properly maintained, it was a torquey, willing power plant that could cruise at 70 miles per hour all day. The body was genuinely aerodynamic for 1947. Palmer had looked at the Lincoln Zephyr for inspiration, but he'd created something distinctly British. Those fared-in headlights, that sloping fastback, the curved triplex windscreen, the first on a British production car, remember, all contributed to a drag coefficient that was remarkable for the time. Section 7. What might have been. Gerald Palmer left Jowett in 1949, returning to Morris. There he designed the MG Magnet ZA, the Riley Pathfinder, and various Wolseley models. He became chief engineer of BMC, but fell out with Chairman Leonard Lord in 1955 and was dismissed. Alec Isigonis, who would create the Mini, succeeded him. Palmer went to Vauxhall, working on the Victor and Viva ranges before retiring in 1972. Jowett had one last roll of the dice, the CD model, a new commercial vehicle range using updated Bradford mechanicals. Prototypes were built and tested, the tooling was complete. But without body suppliers willing to work with them, it never reached production. About 15 CD models were built, some shipped to New Zealand, one fitted with the Jupiter R4 engine. Most were eventually scrapped. The Javelin story is a classic example of how being right isn't enough. Palmer designed exactly the car Britain needed for export markets. It was advanced, comfortable, and genuinely quick. It proved itself in competition at the highest levels. Contemporary testers praised it consistently. But Jowett simply lacked the financial depth and manufacturing scale to weather the problems that inevitably arise with ambitious new engineering. Compare the Javelin to what survived. The Morris Minor, infinitely more conservative but backed by massive industrial resources. The Austin A40, conventional but reliable. Even Palmer's own MG Magnet, designed for BMC after he left Jowett, was far more cautious. These cars survived because they came from manufacturers who could absorb development costs and production problems. Jowett couldn't. Today, Jowett Javelins remain collectible, with values typically between £4,000 and £10,000 for decent examples. The Jowett Car Club maintains an active membership, preserving knowledge and supplying parts. Several thousand Javelins survive worldwide, still driven and enjoyed by enthusiasts who appreciate their unusual engineering and surprising capabilities. But imagine what might have been if Jowett had survived, if those gearbox problems had been solved quicker, if Ford hadn't bought Briggs, if the export market hadn't collapsed. Palmer's next design might have been even more revolutionary. British motor racing might have had another unlikely hero challenging the established Marquez. Instead, we have a cautionary tale about ambition without resources, brilliance without backing. The Javelin proved that a small Yorkshire firm could design and build a car capable of beating Jaguars and Rileys in competition. What it couldn't prove was that the same firm could survive the brutal economics of post-war British manufacturing. If you remember the Javelin, if you've driven one, if your father or grandfather owned one, share your stories in the comments below. These cars deserve to be remembered not as failures, but as examples of genuine engineering courage. Of designers and engineers who refused to play it safe, who pushed boundaries, even when commercial logic suggested they shouldn't. And if this story reminded you why classic British cars matter, why we preserve these histories, please hit that subscribe button. Like this video. Share it with someone who appreciates engineering ambition over corporate caution. because stories like the Jowett Javelin of brilliant cars from vanished makers deserve to be told and retold. Thank you for watching. Drive safely, cherish the classics, and remember that sometimes the most interesting cars in history are the ones that didn't quite make it.